Another tri-generational conversation for you, the emerging leader. This is the Limitless Leadership Lounge. I'm John Gehring, alongside Dr. Anuma Karim, joining us from Bangladesh today, and Coach Jim Johnson, who has just received his copy of Rise of the Reader. And that's what we're going to dive into today and talking with Nick Hutchison. So, Coach, you just got your copy of the book yesterday, and you've networked with Nick, brought Nick along, and we're really excited to dive in. So go ahead and take it away.
Great. Yes. Our friend Justin Peters, that also runs a great podcast, has had Nick, and we've had Justin on our podcast, introduced me to Nick. So I had the pleasure to talk to him. I'm really excited. I just got a copy of his book, The Rise of the Reader. Although I got to tell you, a quick funny thing is when I talked to Nick, I misread it. I thought it was The Rise of the Leader. I being a big in leadership. So he had to correct me. My eyes aren't as good as I guess they used to be. But I am an avid reader, as all of us are. So we're excited to have you, Nick. And let me give you an introduction here, and then I'll get you started here. So Nick Hutchison is the visionary force behind Bookfingers, a thriving 7-figure marketing agency bridging authors and readers. In just over 7 years, he has cultivated a platform reaching over 1 million people monthly and hosts the top 2% global podcast, Book Thinkers, Life-Changing Books, featuring interviews with renowned authors like Grant Cardone and Lewis Howes. Nick's platform and services have empowered countless authors to reach millions of readers, driving substantial revenue growth. His services encompass video production, podcast booking, and social media brand building. With a mission to inspire readers to take action, Nick authored Rise of the Reader, delving into mastering reading habits and applying newfound knowledge to unlock potential. And Nick has a background in this, and there's my copy as well. So Nick, first of all, welcome to the Limitless Leadership Lounge. We're really excited to have you.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and I don't mind that you misread the title, because I think that readers are leaders, and so maybe there's a little subliminal meaning there as well.
Well, thank you. That's a great bridge. I appreciate that, Nick. So, well, let me start. Because reading is I agree with you, leaders are readers, although I don't think as many people are reading as much, because there's so many other ways that we can receive content. But I still love reading. So tell us a little bit, we'll get right into it, tell us a little bit why you read the book or wrote the book, and what would be like from a reading habit or technique that a young emerging leader could be helped with if they read the book.
Two great questions to kick off today. So number one, I decided to write this book because over the years of building my community, Book Thinkers, where I post a daily review and sort of introduce my community to a new nonfiction book on Instagram every day, I've received hundreds of the same questions. Hey, Nick, how do we choose the right books? How do we take notes effectively? How do we turn what we've read into actual behavior change and action? How do we implement it? And a bunch of other similar questions. And so I'm of service to my community, right? Like I care a lot about impact. So I'm individually responding to every inquiry as it comes in. But I realized, I think really two things. Number one was that it's tough. They're right, individually responding to people. There's no leverage to that. I wish there was just a resource that I could point everybody to that had all of my answers to those questions. And then I think number two was that I was underserving those people because I'd never taken the time to define my own implementation strategies. I'd never taken the time to translate them from my brain and from my behavior into a book or into an article or something that people could use. So I decided to write the book on the subject. And listen, I did not want to be a writer. That was not part of my vision for this business, but there was no other resource that I could point people to that I felt confident in. So I decided to write the book on the subject. And I will give an introductory strategy that I think everybody could start to use. Sometimes I do hear from leaders and other people, hey, Nick, I appreciate that you love reading books, but I'm way too focused on other things. I can't read. I don't have time to read. So I love to follow up and ask those same people, hey, if I paid you $10,000 to read a book by the end of the month, do you think you could do it? And that same person's like, I could read 5, right? So they fall into the trap. It's not a question of whether or not you can read. We can all read. but it's a question of whether or not we value it enough to prioritize it in our calendars. So I'll kind of wrap up my first answer by saying that in as little as 15 minutes twice a day, you can read 20 to 26 books a year in the world of personal development and nonfiction books. And here's the math. So 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening is 30 minutes a day. For somebody that's just starting out, 30 minutes is probably 20 pages of reading. Do that 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, take the weekends off. 5 times 20 is 100 pages. And most of these books average about 200 pages these days. So that's a book every 2 weeks, or maybe a book every 2.5 weeks. So I think we just replace a little bit of social media and a little bit of Netflix with reading a great book, and we could read 20 to 26 books a year that way. So it's about being proactive and scheduling the reading time into our calendars.
Right. And it's all about setting priorities. And many of my students, they always complain, oh, I don't have the time to read books. And that is when I have told them that I took some tricks from the book, one of my favorite book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. So I said that just tiny bits. And what you mentioned, that those are the examples of tiny bits, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night. I even have in my cell phone, I have Kindle, then I have my iPad. If I'm running in the treadmill, I read something there. So I make the time all around. So I think that is why I feel that readers, I totally agree that readers are leaders, and it has shifted my life to a different angle. And I would share with the listeners here, like even when life is tough, and you have to struggle with so many things, it were the books that rescued me, gave me all the skills to tackle the problem, find why I'm thinking this way, bringing me into that growth mindset and all those kind of things. So my question to you, how did reading book impact your life? Why did you become so passionate about promoting reading in all the platforms?
Well, I'm happy that you mentioned Atomic Habits by James Clear. One of my favorite concepts in that book is that every action you take today, every habit that you participate in, is a vote for the person you're becoming in the future. And right. So the other way to think about that is where you are today as a result of the habits and actions that you've been taking over the last couple of years. And so books have changed every area of my life. In the last 10 years, I've read and implemented hundreds and hundreds of books on health and wellness, on personal finance and business, on relationships, mindset, happiness. And I've been able to improve every single area of my life. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I really do enjoy the passage of time. I'm present, I'm healthy, I'm wealthy, and I'm happy. And that's because of these books. They condense decades of somebody else's lived experience and greatest life lessons into days of reading. And you can get access to them for $10 to $20 in a few hours of your time. So I sort of joke around with people. When we're recording this, I'm 29 years old. But if you include all of the books behind me, I'm thousands of years old because right. I've read thousands of years of other people's greatest life lessons, and then I've just implemented them. Like, I don't think life has to be so hard. I think you could be healthy, wealthy, and happy if you just read and implement these books. That's why I'm such a big fan.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also love, Nick, how you've leveraged this and turned it into something where you're trying to help others accomplish the same thing. And one of the ways that you do that is through your podcast as well. Can you talk a little bit about, because you've had some huge names on your podcast, how that started and what value that also has provided to you too?
As I was posting book reviews on social media, I started to do some paid reviews, but I was also balancing a lot of books that I was just reading, right? I had this big backlog of books that I'd already read and taken great notes on. So I'd put those book reviews out there as well. And some of my favorite authors of all time started to share those reviews, comment on our posts. Maybe they would follow the account. And so I thought to myself, wow, maybe I have access to some of these people now that I have a little bit of a community and I'm generating some attention online. And one of my mentors, Evan Carmichael, he said to me one time, hey, you should do a podcast. I bet that would make you uncomfortable. That's an opportunity for growth and to create some progress in your life. If you could sit down with some of your favorite authors, do you think that would get the butterflies going, right? The pit in your stomach? And I said, yeah, I think so. And so it started as an opportunity for growth, and the dots started to connect, I think, because these people were in my community. And so within 10 episodes, I had already interviewed some of my favorite authors of all time, some pretty big names. And I started to be able to leverage their credibility to grow my business and my social media platform. And so that enabled me to create a bigger impact because I was reaching more people. And I just started to feed into that. I started to focus a lot on going out there and working with some people that already had big names, sold millions of books, had credibility, millions of social media followers. And as a result, I could grow my platform a little bit faster as well. So that's sort of the backstory. And how has it impacted me? I think a couple of things. I mean, number one, nothing is as fancy as it seems. Every single one of these famous authors is just a person. They have a problem getting their camera turned on or their mic set up. They have to reschedule, they're nervous and they ask you, hey, can I answer that again? And they're just people that have maybe taken a little bit more risk. Maybe they've pursued their dreams with a little bit more vigor, but they're just people. And I think that's helped me relate to them in a big way and give me more confidence to realize that I can go out there and play a bigger game as well.
Great.
And I really love, so go ahead, Coach.
I was just going to say with the podcast is you've had so many, well-known people. Can zero in because, we want to help young leaders. What are one or two, habits that these people that are being successful doing consistently? We talked about Atomic Habits, which is a great book by James Clear, but help our young leaders with some of these people you've interviewed. What have you found have been like one or two things that they consistently do?
To preface my answer, I'll say that none of them, regardless of how fast they came onto the scene, had any type of overnight success. When you think of somebody like Alex Hormozy, who just came out of nowhere over the last couple of years, millions of social media followers a year, just kind of blowing up. I mean, he was sleeping on gym floors 10 years ago, building his business. Or when you think of Grant Cardone, he's in his 60s. I mean, 15 years ago, nobody knew who he was, but now he manages billions of dollars of real estate and millions of social media followers. So the point is, nobody had any type of overnight success. What they all have in common, from my perspective, is, I mean, you mentioned, what do people do consistently? They consistently show up and put in the work. They delay gratification. They do things today to set their future selves up for success. And so they put in the work every single day. They just show up every single day. And that's what I love, because it's that whole concept of how do you eat an elephant? It's not in one bite, it's one bite at a time. And that's what all of these people do. There's not kind of like a sprint, slow down, fall off for a while, sprint, slow down, fall off for a while. They just show up, small little steps in the right direction every single day. And eventually, as that activity compounds, it leads to exponential progression. So they delay gratification and they show up and they just put in the work, the monotonous stuff that we don't want to do. They do it. And I think that's so admirable. They're able to delay gratification like that. So that's one thing, is just show up every single day and be consistent. And I think another thing that I've realized a lot of these people do very well is they delegate. They create leverage in their own lives and businesses by delegating things that don't bring them energy, or things that from a per hour perspective should be outsourced. Like, there's an opportunity cost to doing work that could be outsourced for less than 25% of what you're worth hourly, right? So like, there's some fun equations and stuff to put around it, but they all outsource. They don't do things that they don't want to do. They focus on bigger and bigger tasks, and they build their teams rather than try to take all the money out of the businesses.
Oh, so true. And one of the things that really hit me when you talked about Evan Carmichael being your one of your mentor, because I used to follow his. He used to review books, the speakers, in such a wonderful way that just while making my breakfast, I used to listen to him. So what mentors while you're reading books? Can you mention some of those mentors, real life mentors, or the books from the or mentors from the books that really influence some of the ways you are leading your life now?
There's a TED Talk that I watched a long time ago where Ty Lopez, sort of a famous internet marketer of yesteryear, not everybody loves him, but he had some good stuff to teach. He said to the audience, hey, how much would you pay to fly to my house next week for dinner if I told you that? And then he just starts naming a bunch of people. But maybe he said Arnold Schwarzenegger is there teaching weightlifting. Mahatma Gandhi is there teaching peace. Steve Jobs is there teaching innovation. And he just starts naming a bunch of people dead and alive. He said, how much would you be willing to pay? And people toss out all these crazy numbers. And he says, well, they won't be there, spoiler alert, but I have books written by them and books written about them. It's sort of a similar thing. You can still ask questions and then receive answers. You can still learn from them. They can still lecture to you, but it's a heck of a lot less expensive than the numbers that people are tossing out. And you don't even need to fly. You just need to buy their books. And that sort of hit me in a big way back in the day. I realized that I could be mentored by the world's most successful people in health, wealth, and happiness by simply reading their books and implementing what they've taught me. Sometimes even filtering my decision-making through frameworks that they have and things like that. So they're part of my team. So most of my mentors are virtual, or sorry, not even virtual. I don't even know how to describe it. They're in the books that sit behind me. But I do have some wonderful in-person mentors. I'll mention two. So one that's been around for the last 5 or 6 years, I meet with him every single week, is Kevin Horsley. Kevin wrote a book called Unlimited Memory. He's a pretty amazing person, both from a business perspective, but also from a memory and implementation perspective. In fact, he even won a competition one time called the Everest of Memory competition, where he memorized the first 10,000 digits of pi. Wow. And they would call out a digit like, what's number 7,221? And he would know it. Pretty crazy. But Kevin's met with me every single week for the last 5 years, and we just talk about business and life. And he's been such an amazing resource. And it's an unpaid relationship. I don't know what I provide him, but he just shows up and we get to chat and I get to ask him questions. And so shout out Kevin, what an amazing mentor. And his book, Unlimited Memory, is fantastic. And I will mention Evan Carmichael is the second one. I just spent, I'm from the US, but I just spent Canadian Thanksgiving at Evan's house up in Toronto, Canada, and got to hang out with him for a couple of days. And Evan is the reason that I started my podcast. He was episode number 1, but also episode number 100. His book, Built to Serve, transformed the way that I think about purpose. Evan says your purpose comes from your pain. And books helped me overcome a lot of pain, and that's why I love recommending them now. I think the right book at the right time can change somebody's life. Evan, I mean, there are so many other things that I do that Evan has guided me towards. So shout out Evan Carmichael. He's been an amazing mentor for me.
We're talking with Nick Hutchison. Bookthinkers.com is where you can learn more about The Rise of the Reader, his latest book, and so many more of the services too. Nick, we're really excited to have you here. We've been talking a lot, like early on, especially about reading and how you did the math and you can read 20 to 26 books in a year just by making a simple addition, slight tweaks, reallocating your time. But how do we make the most of that time that we read? Are there 2 or 3 tips that maybe you can give our audience who may be new readers who are intimidated by picking up a book, especially a personal development book, to make the most of it?
Yeah, John, I appreciate the question. And thank you for giving me the opportunity again to share lessons from this book, Rise of the Reader. One of the things that I recognize today is that most people read without setting an intention. And I'll say this, put me on the record, reading without an intention, you're underserving yourself. And here's what I mean. Every time I start a new book, I set a SMART goal. That's what I call an intention, a SMART goal for the book. For anybody that's not familiar with it, I'll just quickly run through the SMART acronym. So SMART, as far as goal setting is concerned, stands for specific, measurable, attainable, meaning realistic, relevant, meaning you're emotionally connected to the goal, and time-bound. So if I pick up a book like Rise of the Reader, I don't want to just dive in. I want to set a goal that creates momentum and action in my life. I'll give you an example. So if I was reading Rise of the Reader, I would set an intention like find and implement at least 2 new note-taking techniques for the books that I'm reading in my life by the end of November. That is specific. I know what the goal is. It's measurable. Find and implement at least 2 note-taking techniques. So I know whether or not the book served its purpose. Attainable. That's pretty realistic, right? I didn't say like implement 100 things, just 2. It's relevant. Well, I'm reading 100 books a year. So by finding new note-taking techniques, it's going to improve my chances of succeeding in life. So that's a win. I'm emotionally connected to the outcome. And I said by the end of November. So it's time bound. I'm giving myself a deadline to take action. I think making your goal for the book actionable is really important. One of my favorite quotes from Napoleon Hill says that action is the real measure of intelligence. It's not saying that you finished 100 books, but it's implementing 1 or 2 things from 100 books that creates intelligence from my perspective. And I suppose from Napoleon Hill's perspective. So that's what I want to do. I want to set a SMART goal for each book that I read. If I'm reading Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, a great leadership book, I would say find and implement at least 1 new leadership strategy for my team at Book Thinkers and my leadership style by the end of November, right? That's specific, measurable, actionable, relevant to my life, and time bound. So I will take that. So that's kind of tip number 1. Tip number 2, I will take that intention and I will write it on the inside cover of the physical book that I'm reading. So I'll share my goal with the book in the hopes that the book can share those actions back with me. I'll write it on the inside cover and then I'll reread it each and every time I read a few more pages so that I'm leveraging the reticular activating system in our brain. We all have this wonderful filtering mechanism that can share just specific information back with us. And you want to really tune it up so that it shares those actionable strategies back with you. And then, as you're reading through the book, I only highlight and circle things that are related to my intention. Because again, it's not important to memorize 15 quotes from a book. It's important to just take action on 1 or 2 things from a book. That's how I read. And those are some of the things that I share in Rise of the Reader.
Excellent.
Oh.
Hey, Nick, one of the things I'm really excited to get started on your book is you say there's more than 100 new habits to improve your health, wealth, and happiness, which are 3 pretty important factors in anybody's life and certainly for any leader. Can you give us 1 habit for each of those categories, health, wealth, and happiness?
Yeah, absolutely. I decided to include these in the book because I didn't want people to think, oh, he's just teaching us reading strategies, but he hasn't actually implemented anything. Like I didn't want to just be on the, the sciencey side of things. I wanted to be on the relationship side of things as well and share with people the things I've implemented, how they've worked, what I've failed on, kind of give them the full experience. So I decided to break them down like you mentioned. I think there are 35 healthy habits, 35 wealthy habits, and 35 happy habits. These are things that I've read and implemented from the hundreds of books that I've consumed over the last 10 years, things that I still practice today. So for a healthy habit, we'll pull one out. There's so many that I love talking about. I want to make sure that I choose one that's not boring. So we'll talk about an acupressure mat. This is something that a lot of people don't focus on. I go to the gym every day. I work out. I want to recover. And so what I do is I have this, it's like a $30 acupressure mat from Amazon. It has a bunch of little spikes on it. And you lay down on this thing. You can lay down, you can stand on it, you can lay on it in a bunch of different positions. And the little spikes kind of shoot up into your body. They don't pierce your skin, but they do feel uncomfortable for a little while. And they increase blood flow, they decrease inflammation, they help you recover and heal faster. And so it's a little habit. You could do it for 5 minutes every couple of days and just boost your ability to recover, improve your body's ability to function, and just tiny little thing that like I've implemented from one of the books that I've read and I don't hear anybody talk about. As far as
Nick, just one quick thing. if I use that, will that help me after John runs me all over the tennis court and I'm hurt the next day?
Yes, it would probably give you a competitive advantage
Oh no, we don't want that, Nick.
and improve your ability to beat them. Yes. And there are tons of recovery things in that section about sleep and diet and fasting and blood testing and all sorts of things like that.
Cool.
From a wealthy habit
Yeah,
perspective. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No,
Okay.
please go ahead, Nick.
I'll be super fast. So I'll just give two more tips. From the wealthy habits perspective, there are a lot of tips in there that relate to money, but there are also a lot of tips that relate to productivity. And one of the ones that I reiterate is Brian Tracy's concept of eat that frog. So the idea is that every single day you wake up and imagine you have to eat a big, hairy, gross frog. Well, if you wait until the end of the day, you'll be thinking about it all day, and then you'll still have to eat it, right? But if you ate it first thing in the morning, it's out of the way. And that relates to the big kind of tasks that we have to accomplish in life. So many of us procrastinate and we push off that big thing that we have to do that scares us until the end of the day. And we pay for it twice. We think about it all day. It stresses us out. And then we still have to do it at 5 p.m. before we go home, right? So get it out of the way first thing in the morning. And I talk about some of the science about why that's important as well. And then as far as healthy habits, I talk a lot about gratitude. It's one of my favorite themes. I know that this podcast is coming out around Thanksgiving. There are so many things to be thankful for and so many things to be grateful for. One of my favorite quotes from an Indian monk, Gaura Gopal Das, he says that it's not happy people that are grateful, but it's grateful people that are happy. So gratitude is an action. It's an input to the system. And I talk all about some fun ways that you can insert gratitude into your daily routines that make it fun and enjoyable, but also sort of serve your future self as well. So those are a couple of the things that I touch on at the end.
Excellent.
Yeah, beautiful. My last question to you, Nick, one of the quotes I really love is like, think before you speak and speak before you think, read before you think. So that's why often when we are readers, our thinking process automatically, I have seen that whatever I have read or listened to reflects my action as well. So in that way, one of the emerging things that we are observing right now, that the world needs empathy. So I was thinking, what are your thoughts on, do you think that readers can become empathetic individuals? Because when we are reading, we are putting ourselves into other people's shoes. So if we choose to read those books that can broaden our mind to understand others, reduce our biases at each other. So how do you think that this could happen? And my section B of the question is many nowadays say that we don't want to read. What are the other options to find or gather the information? Because not all are readers. And then I have told them to go for audibles. So what are your take? Like, should they go for audibles, or reading is the only thing through which they can really acquire the knowledge that we are thriving for?
Okay, so part one, I do believe that empathy is a skill, and every skill can be improved. And one of the best ways to improve the skill of empathy is to read and diversify your perspective. I think when you do put yourself in somebody else's shoes, maybe reading a biography or an autobiography of somebody who went through a tough time, or somebody that you disagree with, somebody that sits on the other side of the political spectrum or a social issue that you fight for or believe in, it can definitely diversify your perspective and improve your ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So yeah, I definitely think empathy is a skill and reading is a great way to cultivate it. And then part B of your question, I'll say this, I consume 100 books a year, 25 of them are audibles, but 80% of the inputs to our brain are visual. And so by default, if you're only listening to something, you're at a disadvantage. And most people listen to a book while multitasking. They're driving, they're doing chores, they're at the gym, they're focused on something else. So not only are you at a disadvantage from an input perspective, but now you're multitasking instead of monotasking by focusing on a physical paper book or a Kindle or an iPad like you do. So I think that reading, reading a physical paper book is best, or a Kindle. I think that listening to a book instead of listening to music is probably, that's a step in the right direction. I try to listen to books that are either A, really, really, really long, and I can't picture myself actually reading the physical book, like 600-700 pages or more, or B, books that I'm not expecting to implement something from. I'm just sort of satisfying curiosity. So I listen to a lot of biographies and autobiographies because they play more like a movie, and it's okay if I miss something because they're not teaching frameworks. They're teaching like more general life lessons. So I hope that helps answer that question.
Yeah, and my last thing, I'm just curious because you are the reading expert. I tried speed reading, all the techniques like using my fingers to go speedily going through those books. But then after reading, I did not feel that I really got into the book. I finished the book quickly and everything, but my focus, my attention, and all those things weren't there. So, what is your take on speed reading? Does it let us be immersed into the book, or just finishing the book, or is it like a different set of skills?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on it as well. I mean, my book, Rise of the Reader, is really for people who are just starting their reading process and just exploring personal development for the first time. So I definitely don't recommend speed reading for anybody that's just starting out. I'll say that without speed reading, without removing subvocalization and being kind of crazy, my reading speed has just naturally probably like tripled, quadrupled since I first started reading. And my retention has gone up as well. There's a really interesting metaphor, and I'll try to be brief here. Imagine you're driving through a neighborhood, but you're going really slow. Well, your mind can start to wander. So you can look at the houses, the landscaping, the cars in the driveway, like, oh, look, a G-Wagon, like that's cool. But if you were speeding through the neighborhood, your mind can't wander, right? Like your eyes are glued to the road because you don't want to cause an accident. I think the same thing about reading. I don't recommend speed reading in the traditional sense, but I do recommend reading faster, because if you're not leveraging your brain's full capabilities, you'll start to wander. And then you'll have to go reread the page again and again and again. Like, what did I just read? So I think too slow is an issue. I think too fast is an issue, but like I do lean a little bit on the faster side of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That helps. Thanks.
Yeah. And a question coming from a marketing perspective, Nick, because you do a lot with book thinkers. Obviously you read a lot, but you also fit in, being able to promote your brand. And one of the things that you do is podcast bookings and those types of services too. So could you talk a little bit about the importance of either getting on podcasts if you're an author, or listening to podcasts as someone who wants to read and learn more?
Absolutely. I love podcasting. I listen to a lot of podcasts as well as audiobooks. I love the conversational style of things rather than sometimes just being lectured at in an audiobook. You know what I mean? So from an author's perspective, I think it's really important to get out there, to network with podcast hosts, to answer a bunch of different questions, to share your message in a long form. A short form video, like under 60 seconds, you can share a piece of valuable information. But in a long form podcast like this, we've already been speaking for about 40 minutes or something like that. That's a wonderful opportunity to get to know somebody over a longer period of time. So yeah, get out there, get in front of other people's audiences. You guys have worked hard to build the audience that you have, and you're giving me an opportunity to share my book and my business with everybody. I mean, that's so amazing. And at the same time, when you post about it on social media, I'll share about it with my audience. So it's just sort of like this build together mentality. And I love everything about podcasting. And then as far as listening to podcasts, I think there are so many great resources. You can find a podcast about, just about anything. And so they're all free, right? That's another amazing piece of it. You could just download Spotify or the Apple Podcasts app, the Google Podcasts app, and listen to the world's most interesting and amazing and intelligent people talk about things. And that's pretty cool. I mean, that wasn't available 15 years ago. So I'm definitely pro podcast.
Awesome. Hey, Nick, as far as, because we have, different leaders listening, and some of them are leaders in, the business world, but some are starting their own business or would like to start their own business. Can you tell us a story of how you started your business, and then give some advice for someone that may be contemplating getting into starting their own business?
Well, I was graduating from college. During my college experience, I ran my own house painting business for 2 summers. I hired all my friends and I did door-to-door sales, and it was a lot of fun. But I knew that I wanted to go work for somebody else in a small business and sort of see how the world works without all of my own responsibility. So I took a full-time job out of school, but I also started Book Thinkers as a side hustle at the same time, sharing the books I was reading on social media. Originally, we actually wanted to launch a mobile application that could help readers retain and implement more from the books they were reading, because we were really struggling trying to retain everything from the books we were reading, my friend Alec and I. Long story short, that mobile application didn't take off, but I continued to build the community. I knew that I wanted to work in the reading space one day. So I had my sort of 9 to 5, right? That was my full-time software tech sales job. But then I had my 5 to 9. That was Book Thinkers, a place for me to exercise creativity, to skill transfer some of what I was learning in my full-time job into my side hustle, and build. So my approach was more of a slow and steady wins the race type of approach. No matter how many times you read Aesop's fable, the tortoise and the hare, the tortoise always wins. I didn't want to take on a ton of risk. So I kept my full-time job and I started to build Book Thinkers on the side. And I read so many great books about entrepreneurship and small business. Books like Traction by Gino Wickman, books like The E-Myth Revisited by Michael E. Gerber. And those books talked about slow and steady, building systems, measuring things. And in fact, as Book Thinkers started to grow and I started to hire my first few employees, we reached 6 figures in revenue before I even jumped from my job. So that's how much I wanted to minimize risk. People talk about the stoic entrepreneur facing all odds, making the big jump. It's not how I did it. It's not how I recommend doing it. Because like Michael Gerber says in the E-Myth Revisited, 95% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years because they run out of money, right? They try to build the parachute on the way down, and they operate from a place of scarcity and compromise on values, and they end up failing. And we don't hear from those 19 out of 20 that fail. We only hear from the 1 out of 20 that's the unicorn that succeeds in a big way. So that's my piece of advice for everybody, I suppose, in my story is find a full-time job where you can learn a skill that overlaps with what you're truly passionate about. Build it as a side hustle over time, minimize risk, and don't make the jump until you're really confident that it's going to succeed.
Excellent.
We know business too. As an entrepreneur myself, I know that it's all about providing value. As much as there's those stories like you say, those 1 in 20 of the just be successful. What appears to be an overnight success that actually took like 10 years to build. But it's really all about providing value. If you were to sum it up, maybe in a really quick elevator pitch, because you do a lot of things at Book Thinkers, and certainly you can learn more at bookthinkers.com. But what would be like a 1-minute summary of the value that you provide to both readers and authors?
Authors spend decades learning something very unique and valuable. Then they spend years writing about it, and then nobody buys their books. And that's heartbreaking for me. I genuinely believe the right book at the right time can change somebody's life. And feeling the impact of what that's like, it's amazing. I care so much about that. And so my business is about getting the right authors more exposure for their books. We want to help amplify their message and get that book in the right hands. So at Book Thinkers, from an author perspective, we can help authors create amazing short form video content for social media. So that's like platform building, getting their message out there, building themselves as a thought leader. We could do podcast booking. We could place authors on 4, 8, or 12 interviews per month to talk about their book. And it's always, we prioritize fit, right? The right fit over everything else. And then book reviews. We have a community that does 1 million impressions a month on social media, and we can review their book and get their books in front of a large audience. So that's what we do on the Book Thinker side of things. There are a few other services, but that's kind of the core stuff. And then from a reader perspective, like I mentioned, the right book at the right time can change your life. So many times we think that our problems are unique to us, but the fact is 100 billion people have lived before us. Millions of them have overcome the same problems that you have, and thousands of them have detailed them in a book. And so if you follow our accounts on social media and listen to our podcast, you can find that book that can help you overcome the problem that you're dealing with. Because as humans, we can be helpful. We write books and we encourage people to read them, and it stinks when they don't. So that's sort of what we do from both sides of the coin. And I hope that everybody here found some value in today's conversation. It was a lot of fun.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you're a reader, one great way to dive in and start right away is with Rise of the Reader, and you can learn more at bookthinkers.com, or you can follow Book Thinkers and learn more by following the platform. Or as a writer, Nick, obviously, again, bookthinkers.com to get in touch and to find out about more of these services and how they can help you as a writer reach those readers that you've worked so hard to reach. What should the first thing that they should do as authors to reach out to you and learn more?
On our website, bookthinkers.com, there's a little kind of book, I don't remember what it's called, like Talk to Us or Book a Call or something like that. And it integrates with my calendar. So you can set up a sales call and we can review your book and what you're doing from a marketing perspective. And I can show you our services. And that's the best place to go.
Well, thank Nick very much. I appreciate, I apologize, but I got to ask one more question if you're okay.
Go for it.
You're putting, because a lot of leaders, they try to build a team, which you've been doing. What suggestions would you have for a leader in helping them bring the right people onto their team?
I love in Good to Great by Jim Collins, he talks about the right bus, right? You want the right people on the right bus, and then you find the right seat for them. And sort of, let me explain that metaphor a little bit more. For Book Thinkers, we have 3 core values, and that's the operating mechanism for everybody's decision making. Like, filter your decisions through these 3 core values. If it aligns with all 3, then go ahead and make the decision. You don't need to run it up the ladder, for instance. So those are the 3 things that we care about the most. And if somebody aligns with those, we can figure out the skills, like those can be improved over time, but the person, that's what matters most. So I think for building a good team, every single person on my team has come from our community, meaning they were following us on social media, they were engaging with things, we started a conversation as a result. I already know that they love great books and want to help promote great authors and stuff. And then it's just a matter of, do you align with these core values, and do you have an existing set of skills that we can develop, or is there something that you're interested in learning more about? Like, I just care so much more about prioritizing people over everything else.
That's great. What are your 3 core values?
Okay, so we have gratitude in everything. I mentioned earlier how gratitude is so important for us. And just every single day we have a group chat on Slack where everybody writes 3 things that they're grateful for. And it's not mandatory, but everybody chooses to do it, because when you filter through a lens of gratitude, what you have, not what you lack, everything is amazing. Number 2 is relentless improvement. So progress is a really important piece of what we do. We're always looking for those 1% improvements. Think Atomic Habits, think the compound effect, small steps in the right direction over a long period of time. And then number 3 is customer first. So whenever there's sort of an internal issue or a customer kind of issue, it's, hey, the customer is right in this situation. Only in extreme situations are they wrong, right? Customer first. Let's think through their lens. Let's think about how we can solve this from their perspective. And so those are our 3: gratitude in everything, relentless improvement, and customer first.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Nick. We really appreciate your time today and your insights, and we look forward to continue staying in touch with you, and keep up your great work.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Grateful for it. And I hope everybody listening has or had a wonderful Thanksgiving.